The fabric of her gown, a deep and liquid emerald, was the only armor she possessed. Ilara stood in the glittering heart of the Obsidian Gala, a place designed to celebrate success. Yet for her, it felt like a beautifully constructed cage. The air, thick with expensive perfume and the low hum of self-congratulation, was difficult to breathe. She had learned long ago how to arrange her features into a mask of serene indifference, a skill honed over a decade of existing in her stepfather's world, a world where she was a necessary, if inconvenient, accessory. She held a flute of champagne, the bubbles dying a slow death within the crystal. She did not drink it. Alcohol dulled the senses, and she needed her senses sharp, her reflexes honed. Surviving these events was a matter of navigating invisible tripwires, of anticipating the subtle shifts in her stepbrother's moods. Julian was a creature of magnificent, terrible ego, and tonight he was incandescent with it. His latest business venture, funded as always by their father's legacy, was being lauded. He moved through the crowd with a practiced swagger, collecting praise like a child collecting shiny stones. Ilara's own contributions, the architectural plans that had secured the primary investors, the late nights spent correcting his flawed projections, the quiet diplomacy with difficult board members, all of it was invisible. It was absorbed into the monolithic narrative of Julian's genius. She was the ghost in his machine, the silent partner in a life where she was permitted to work but never to own. Her payment was continued access to a life she hadn't chosen but was terrified to leave. It was a gilded prison, and the bars were made of obligation and fear. She watched him now, holding court near the grand staircase. He laughed, a sound that was too loud, too performative. It did not reach his eyes. His eyes, a pale, flat blue, were constantly scanning, assessing, looking for the next reflection of his own greatness. They found her. His smile tightened, a fractional, almost imperceptible shift. It was a summons. She felt the familiar cold dread begin to pool in her stomach. It was the exhaustion that came before the battle, the weariness of a soldier who knows the terrain of the coming conflict all too well. She thought about walking away, about simply turning and walking out of the grand ballroom, out of the opulent hotel, out of this life that was slowly grinding her spirit into a fine, colorless dust. But the thought was a fantasy, a fleeting dream. The practicalities were a wall she could not scale, the shared apartment she couldn't afford on her own, the car still in his name, the insidious web of financial and emotional dependencies he had so carefully woven around her. She began to move toward him, her steps measured. The emerald gown whispered against the polished marble floor. She was an architect by training, a designer by soul. She appreciated the lines of this room, the way the light fell from the crystal chandeliers, the perfect soaring arch of the ceiling. She had designed a space like this once, on paper, a public library, a place of quiet and welcome, her final project in university, the one that had won her a prestigious award her stepfather had dismissed as a nice little hobby. Julian had used the portfolio from that project to secure his first internship. He had not credited her. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate, a version that was now a decade out of date. As she drew closer, she could hear his voice, laced with the casual cruelty he reserved for her. He was talking to a small group of sycophants, their faces tilted up at him in adoration. One of them was his new girlfriend, a woman so young and bright-eyed it made Ilara's heart ache. And Ilara, well, she handles the details, Julian was saying, his hand waving dismissively. You know how it is. Someone has to keep the lights on. He turned to her as she arrived, his smile widening into something predatory. Ah, there she is, my anchor, my rock. The words were meant to sound like a compliment, but the tone was pure condescension. He was telling them she was heavy. He was telling them she held him down. She did not react. She merely inclined her head, the mask of serenity firmly in place. Julian, your guests seem pleased. They are pleased, he said, his eyes glinting. He reached out and took the champagne flute from her hand, draining it in one gulp. "Because I deliver. I always deliver." He set the empty glass on a passing waiter's tray and immediately plucked a full one for himself. He looked at her, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "You're not drinking! What's the matter? Not enjoying the party I'm throwing?" "It's a beautiful event," she said, her voice a low, steady murmur. It was a voice she had cultivated to be calming, to be non-threatening. It rarely worked. "It is," he agreed, then leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for everyone in their little circle to hear. "Although, that dress, a bit much, isn't it? Emerald is such a loud color. You have to have the right complexion for it." The barb was precise. It was designed to land on the old insecurity, the one he had been nurturing since they were teenagers when his father married her mother. The subtle, constant reminders that she was different, that she did not belong. The girlfriend giggled, a high, tinkling sound. Ilara felt a tremor go through her, a deep, seismic shudder of pure, unadulterated anger. It was so potent, so raw. She was surprised it didn't crack the very air around her. For 10 years she had swallowed this. For 10 years she had endured his petty cruelties, his gaslighting, his casual theft of her work and her worth. She had done it for her mother, who had begged her to keep the peace. She had done it after her mother passed, out of a misplaced sense of loyalty to the only family she had left. She had done it out of fear. But tonight, something was different. The exhaustion was no longer a heavy blanket. It was a blade. The anger was no longer a simmering coal. It was a white-hot flame. She looked him directly in the eye, and for the first time in a very long time, she did not look away. "I like the color," she said. Her voice was still quiet, but the placating murmur was gone. In its place was something hard and unyielding. The sound of stone. Julian's eyes narrowed. He was not accustomed to this. He was accustomed to her placid agreement, her silent retreat. He had not updated the file. He was trying to run an old program on new hardware, and the system was beginning to crash. "You like it?" he scoffed, his voice rising. "It doesn't matter what you like, Ilara. It matters what looks good. It matters about presentation, image, something you have never understood." "I understand it perfectly," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "I understand that my designs are your image. I understand that my work is your presentation. And I am done." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and glittering and dangerous. The sycophants fell silent. The girlfriend's smile faltered. Julian stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief, which slowly curdled into fury. "You're done?" he hissed, taking a step closer. He was taller than her, broader. He used his physical presence as a tool of intimidation, leaning into her space. "You don't get to be done. We have an arrangement. You have an obligation." "The obligation was to my mother," Ilara said, her voice shaking almost imperceptibly. "She's gone. The arrangement is concluded." She turned to walk away. It was a definitive, final movement, and it was something he could not tolerate. His hand shot out, grabbing her arm just above the elbow. His fingers dug in, brutal and tight. "We are not finished here," he snarled, his face contorted. Pain, sharp and hot, flared up her arm. But it was the humiliation that truly stung, to be manhandled here, in front of everyone, to have his ownership of her displayed so crudely. "Let go of my arm, Julian," she said. Her voice was low, but it carried the unmistakable weight of a final warning. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Or what? What are you going to do, Ilara? You have nothing. You are nothing without me." He tightened his grip, pulling her closer. In the struggle, his elbow jostled the arm of a passing guest. A glass of red wine, deep as blood, arced through the air. It landed squarely on the bodice of her emerald gown, a grotesque, spreading stain. The wine dripped down the green silk, pooling on the marble floor. A collective gasp went through the onlookers. The silence in their immediate vicinity became absolute, a pocket of dead air in the noisy ballroom. Julian looked down at the stain, then back at her face. A slow, cruel smile spread across his lips. He saw the tears welling in her eyes, tears of rage, of pain, of a decade of suppressed grief finally breaking through the dam. "Oh, look at that," he said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "You've gone and ruined your pretty little dress." He leaned in, his breath hot and sour against her ear. "Don't cry. It's not a good look for you. Black women don't cry pretty." The words were a physical blow. They struck her with more force than his hand on her arm. It was the distillation of every unspoken insult, every casual degradation, every racial microaggression she had endured in his world. It was designed to shatter her completely. She did not scream. She did not sob. One tear, hot and defiant, escaped and traced a clean path through the makeup on her cheek. She simply stared at him, her vision blurring, the sounds of the gala fading into a dull, distant roar. In that moment, she felt utterly, completely alone, the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. That was the quality of the stillness that suddenly descended upon their small, ugly tableau. It was a silence with weight and texture, a silence that consumed the ambient noise of the party. Conversations 30 feet away faltered and died. The string quartet, mid-stroke, seemed to lose its rhythm. It was as if a vacuum had opened in the center of the room, and its name was Jin-Woo Kwon. He had not moved from his position by the large arched window where he had been observing the city lights. He had been there for the better part of an hour, a man so perfectly still he had become part of the architecture. He wore a charcoal suit tailored with such precision it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. He held a glass of what looked like water, his fingers long and elegant against the crystal. He did not rush. He was not performing. He simply turned his head, and the world tilted on its axis. His eyes, dark and impossibly deep, found Julian's hand on Alara's arm. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Julian felt the shift before he understood it. The eyes of his audience were no longer on him. They had been drawn away by a stronger gravity. He turned, blinking, irritated by the interruption to his performance. He saw a man, impeccably dressed, looking at him. Just looking. There was no menace in the man's expression. There was, in fact, no expression at all. It was a face of placid, absolute neutrality, and it was the most terrifying thing Julian had ever seen. "Can I help you?" Julian snapped, still clinging to the wreckage of his dominance. It was a fatal miscalculation. It assumed the stranger was an intruder in his world. It failed to comprehend that they were all, in fact, standing in the stranger's. The man, Jin-Woo Kwon, did not answer the question. He did not acknowledge Julian at all. His gaze remained fixed on the point of contact, the white-knuckled grip on the emerald sleeve. Then he spoke. His voice was not loud. It was a low, calm baritone, steady as iron wrapped in silk. It did not need volume to command attention. It simply took it. "Let go of her arm." It was not a request. It was a statement of a future event that was about to occur. Julian, confused and unnerved by the man's unnerving calm, hesitated. A flicker of defiance crossed his face. "This is a private conversation," he said, trying to reassert his authority. Jin-Woo Kwon took a single, deliberate step forward. He did not hurry. The movement was economical, precise. He stopped beside them. He was not as tall as Julian, but he occupied a space that was infinitely larger. He smelled faintly of sandalwood and something else, something clean and cold, like winter air. He looked at Alara then. His eyes met hers, and for a breathtaking moment, the entire world fell away. He did not see the ruined dress. He did not see the tear track on her cheek. He saw her, the architect, the survivor, the quiet strength holding herself together with sheer force of will. It was a look of profound, startling recognition. It was the kind of look she had been starving for her entire life. The connection was severed as he turned his attention back to Julian. His expression had not changed, but the neutrality had sharpened into something infinitely harder. It was the stillness of a predator that knows the hunt is already over. "I will not ask again," Jinwoo said. The quiet words vibrated with a power that was structural, ancient. It was the power of tectonic plates shifting deep beneath the earth. It was the power of a man who owned the ground on which they stood. Literally. The hotel, the gala, the very air they were breathing, it was all his. Julian's bravado finally, catastrophically, failed him. He was a performer, and his audience had abandoned him for a far more compelling show. His grip loosened, his fingers falling away from Ilara's arm as if the fabric had suddenly become superheated. He took a half-step back, a flicker of animal fear in his eyes. Jinwoo's gaze did not waver. He made a minute, almost imperceptible gesture with his free hand. From the periphery, two men materialized. They moved with the same quiet efficiency as their employer, their dark suits blending into the shadows. They were not security guards from the hotel. They were something else entirely. They flanked Julian, their presence a sudden, suffocating pressure. "Mr. Kwan," one of the men said, his voice a low rumble. "Mr. Park," Jinwoo acknowledged, his eyes still locked on Julian. "It seems this gentleman has become overstimulated. He requires a moment of quiet reflection, away from the festivities." "Of course, Mr. Kwan," Mr. Park replied. He placed a hand, gently but with immovable firmness, on Julian's shoulder. Julian flinched, his face a mess of confusion and outrage. "Get your hands off me! Do you know who I am?" It was Jinwoo who answered, his voice still unnervingly calm. "I do. You are Julian Croft, son of the late Marcus Croft. Your company, Croft Development, is currently leveraged to 93% of its asset value. The majority of that debt was acquired by a subsidiary of my corporation this morning. In effect, Julian, you are an employee, and you are embarrassing the company." He took a small sip of his water. "You're fired." The words were delivered without malice. They were delivered as simple, inarguable facts. The air left Julian's lungs in a whoosh. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, mottled gray. The performative confidence, the swagger, the arrogance, it all collapsed in an instant, leaving only a hollow, terrified shell. You can't," he stammered, looking wildly between Jinwoo and the two men who now bracketed him like parentheses around a word that had lost its meaning. "I can," Jinwoo said. "I have." He turned his attention away from Julian as if he had ceased to exist. He looked at Mr. Park. "Ensure he finds his way home, and inform him his access to all company and family properties has been revoked, effective immediately. His personal items will be forwarded to him." "Yes, sir." With no further ceremony, the two men guided Julian away. He did not struggle. He moved like a puppet whose strings had been cut, his feet shuffling on the marble floor. His exit was so quiet, so efficient. It was as if he had been erased from the room. The small crowd that had witnessed the exchange began to disperse, melting back into the larger party, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. They spoke in hushed whispers, stealing glances at the man in the charcoal suit who had just dismantled another man's life with a few quiet sentences. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was a space cleared for her. Ilara stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. The pain in her arm was a dull throb, a distant echo of the confrontation. Her mind was reeling, trying to process the sheer, stunning velocity of what had just happened. "You're fired." The acquisition of debt, the quiet, absolute demolition. Jinwoo Kwan stood before her, his expression softening as he looked at her. He shrugged off his impeccably tailored jacket. The movement was fluid, graceful. He did not hand it to her. He stepped closer and gently, respectfully, draped it over her shoulders. The charcoal wool was heavy, warm, and smelled of that clean, cold air. It covered the wine stain completely. It covered her shaking arms. It was an act of profound, instinctive kindness. "Are you all right, Miss James?" he asked, his voice for her alone. She looked up at him, truly looked at him. The man who had been a name on a memo, a ghost in her own machine, the silent partner she had only ever heard about in passing. Kwon, the Korean investor who had saved her stepfather's firm from bankruptcy years ago, the one they called the chairman. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She simply nodded, a small, jerky movement. He offered her his arm, not in a gesture of possession like Julian's had been, but as an offer of support, a steady anchor in a world that had just been irrevocably tilted. "Come," he said gently. "Let's get you out of here." She took his arm. The fabric of his shirt was crisp and cool beneath her fingers. As he led her away from the center of the ballroom, a path clearing before them as if by magic, she felt something she had not felt in a decade. Safety. He led her not towards the grand exit, but through an unmarked door tucked away behind a tapestry depicting a mythical hunting scene. The noise of the gala was instantly cut off, replaced by a hushed quiet. They were in a service corridor, clean and utilitarian, a stark contrast to the opulence they had just left. He did not speak, simply guided her down the hallway and through another door that opened onto a private, glass-enclosed terrace. The city spread out below them, a breathtaking tapestry of glittering lights against the velvet dark of the night sky. The air was cool and clean, a welcome balm after the stuffy ballroom. A few simple, elegant pieces of furniture were arranged on the terrace, 2 low chairs and a small table. It was a space designed for quiet contemplation, a world away from the chaos downstairs. He guided her to one of the chairs and she sank into it, the borrowed weight of his jacket a strange comfort. He remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the city. He was giving her space. He was giving her time to breathe. She pulled the jacket tighter around herself, the fine wool a shield against the sudden chill she felt. Her mind was a whirlwind, replaying the last 10 minutes on a loop. Julian's sneer, the sting of the wine, the dead finality in Jin Woo's voice. "You're fired." "He was my stepbrother," she said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate in the quiet air. She felt a bizarre need to explain, to contextualize the ugliness he had witnessed. "I know," Jin Woo said, his voice still calm. He turned from the cityscape to look at her. His face was shadowed, but his eyes were luminous. "Julian Croft, and you are Alara James, lead project designer at Croft Development, though your title is officially junior associate. You graduated top of your class from Columbia with a master's in architecture. Your thesis was on sustainable urban residential design. You won the Allister Prize for it." Alara stared at him, her throat suddenly tight. He had not just seen her tonight. He had been seeing her for a long time. The file he was working from was not just updated, it was meticulously, frighteningly complete. "How?" she began, her voice barely a whisper. "My company, KIG, has held a minority, non-voting stake in Croft Holdings for the last 8 years, he explained, his tone matter of fact, as if discussing the weather. "It was a small legacy investment. We review the quarterly reports. Your design work, even filtered through your stepbrother's presentations, was notable. The efficiency, the elegance of the lines. It was a different language from the rest of the company's portfolio, a much more intelligent one." She felt a blush creep up her neck, a startling mix of embarrassment and a fierce, unfamiliar pride. To be seen. To have her work, the part of her that was most true, recognized and named by someone who understood its language. It was disorienting. "I began to look more closely," he continued, his gaze steady. "I cross-referenced the project timelines with your academic portfolio. The signature was unmistakable. You were the architect. He was merely the narrator." A short, bitter laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. The narrator. "Yes, that's a good word for it." She looked down at her hands, which were twisting a loose thread on his jacket. Why didn't you say anything?" "It was not my place," he said simply. "My interest was financial. As long as the company remained profitable, its internal dynamics were not my concern. The numbers, however, began to change. The profitability was decreasing, while Mr. Croft's personal expenditures were increasing, a classic and frankly boring pattern of mismanagement. I instructed my team to begin a quiet acquisition of the company's debt 6 months ago. The final purchase was concluded yesterday." He paused. "Your stepbrother's behavior tonight merely accelerated the timeline of his redundancy." It was all so clinical, so precise. A corporate execution. She should have been horrified, but she was not. She was relieved. A deep, bone-weary relief that felt like a physical release of tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying. The monster that had haunted her life had been vanquished, not in a fiery battle, but by a series of quiet, deliberate keystrokes and a calm, final conversation. It was the contrast between the antagonist's hollow, performed power and the protector's deep, quiet, structural power. "What happens now?" she asked, the question encompassing everything. Julian, the company, her apartment, her life. "Now," he said, stepping closer. "You are safe." He crouched down in front of her, bringing his face level with hers. The gesture was one of respect, of deference. "My assistant is arranging for your belongings to be moved from your apartment tonight. You will be staying at my residence. It is secure." Her head snapped up, a jolt of alarm cutting through the shock. "No, I can't. That's too much. I don't even know you." "You are right," he said, his expression unreadable. "That was poorly phrased. It was not a command. It is an offer, a temporary solution until you decide on your next steps. You are in a compromised position, Miss James. Your stepbrother is volatile and has just been publicly humiliated and financially ruined. He is unpredictable. My home is the safest place for you to be for the next few days." She looked into his eyes, searching for a catch, a hidden agenda. She had spent her entire adult life navigating the transactional nature of men like her stepfather and Julian. Kindness was always a currency. Protection always had a price. But in his gaze, she found only a quiet, steady sincerity. He was not offering her a cage, gilded or otherwise. He was offering her a sanctuary. "Why?" she asked, the word small and fragile. "Why are you doing this?" He considered the question for a long moment. "Because," he said finally, his voice soft, "I do not like to see brilliant work squandered, and I do not tolerate bullies." He reached out, his movement slow, and with the pad of his thumb, he gently wiped away the single tear track that still stained her cheek. His touch was light, respectful, and sent a jolt of warmth through her. "And because my grandmother would be very disappointed in me if I left a woman in distress alone in the rain, even if the rain is metaphorical." A small smile touched Alara's lips for the first time that night. It felt like a foreign expression. "Your grandmother sounds like a formidable woman." "She is," he agreed, a faint hint of a smile in his own eyes. "She is also my head of security." So the sentiment is both philosophical and practical. The dry wit of the statement was so unexpected it startled a genuine laugh out of her. The sound was rusty, unused, but it was real. In the face of all that quiet power and wealth, in the aftermath of all that drama, he offered her a joke, a small human connection. "Okay," she said, her voice firmer now. "Okay, Mr. Kwan?" "Jinwoo," he corrected gently. "Jinwoo," she repeated, "for a few days." "For as long as you need," he replied, standing up and offering her his hand once more. She placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and steady. He helped her to her feet, his jacket still draped around her shoulders like a protective mantle. As they stood there, looking out at the glittering, endless city, Alara felt the ground beneath her feet begin to solidify. For the first time in a very long time, it felt like her own. The penthouse was an exercise in monastic minimalism. It occupied the top 3 floors of the building they had just been in, a silent, sprawling space of pale wood, polished concrete, and vast expanses of glass. There were no photographs. There was no clutter. The art on the walls was large, abstract, and spoke in a language of color and form that was both challenging and deeply calming. It was the kind of space Alara had often dreamed of designing, a home that was a sanctuary, not a showroom. A woman in a sharp, dark suit with her hair pulled back in a severe but elegant bun met them as the private elevator opened directly into the living area. She had a tablet in one hand and an aura of terrifying efficiency. This had to be Ms. Choi, the assistant. "Mr. Kwan," she said, her bow crisp and economical. "Welcome home. Everything is in hand." She glanced at Alara, her expression neutral but not unkind. "Miss James, your suite is ready. Your personal effects from the apartment are being collected by the team now. They will be inventoried, professionally cleaned, and delivered within the hour." Alara blinked. The sheer speed and thoroughness were staggering. She had spent the last 5 years trying to untangle herself from Julian's life, and Jinwoo's team was accomplishing it in a single evening. "Thank you," Alara murmured, feeling overwhelmed. "I have also taken the liberty of purchasing a selection of basic necessities and toiletries for your immediate use." Ms. Choi continued, her eyes on her tablet. "A full wardrobe consultation can be arranged for tomorrow morning, should you require it." "That won't be necessary," Alara said, finding her voice. "But thank you." The idea of a wardrobe consultation was so far outside her reality it was almost comical. Jinwoo gestured toward a floating staircase. "Ms. Choi will show you to your room. Please make yourself comfortable. This is a safe place." Alara followed the assistant up the stairs, the cool glass beneath her borrowed evening slippers. The suite was larger than her entire apartment. It had its own sitting area, a bathroom that looked like a high-end spa, and a bedroom with a wall of glass overlooking the northern sweep of the city. On the bed, neatly laid out, were silk pajamas, a plush robe, and a collection of toiletries from a brand Alara had only ever read about in magazines. "If you require anything at all, you can use the intercom system," Ms. Choi said, gesturing to a sleek panel on the wall. "The kitchen is fully stocked. Please feel free to help yourself to anything. Mr. Kwan has a conference call, but he asked me to inform you that he will not be disturbed for the remainder of the evening unless you require his assistance." She gave another crisp bow, and then she was gone, leaving Alara alone in the vast, silent room. Alara walked over to the wall of glass and looked out at the city. Her city. From this height, it looked like a circuit board, intricate and pulsing with light. Down there, somewhere, her old life was being systematically dismantled and packed into boxes. Up here, a new one was being offered, complete with silk pajamas. The disorientation was profound. It was a form of emotional whiplash. She was grateful, deeply grateful, for the rescue, for the safety. But she was also terrified. She had just traded one powerful man's orbit for another's. She had spent a decade as an asset, a tool. She could not, would not, do it again. She showered in the enormous rainfall shower, washing away the scent of spilled wine and Julian's suffocating presence. She washed away the gala, the humiliation, the last 10 years. She changed into the impossibly soft pajamas and sat on the edge of the bed, Jinwoo's heavy jacket lying in a heap beside her. She picked it up, the scent of sandalwood and winter air clinging to the wool. It was the smell of quiet, decisive power, the smell of safety. But safety could become a dependency, and she was done with dependencies. She slept, a deep, dreamless sleep, for the first time in months. When she awoke, the sun was just beginning to cast a pale golden light over the city. The silence of the penthouse was absolute. She found her way downstairs to the kitchen, a marvel of stainless steel and dark wood. Jinwoo was there, dressed in simple gray sweats and a t-shirt, pouring hot water into a teapot. He looked younger, softer. Without the armor of his suit, he was just a man. A very fit man, but a man nonetheless. "Good morning," he said, his voice quiet in the morning stillness. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes," Thank you, she said, her voice a little rough. I haven't slept like that in a long time. Tea? He offered, holding up the pot. She nodded, and he poured a cup of pale, fragrant tea for her. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their tea, watching the city awaken below. I need to be clear about something, she said finally, setting her cup down on the marble island. Her voice was firm. She had rehearsed this in her head since she woke up. He turned to face her, giving her his full attention. He did not look surprised. He looked expectant. I am incredibly grateful for what you did last night, she began. For the rescue, for this place, for all of it. But I cannot be kept. I am not a project to be managed or a damsel to be rescued. I have my own skills, my own mind. I don't leave because things become complicated. I left Julian because the arrangement was based on a lie. I will not enter into another one. He listened, his expression unchanging. When she finished, he nodded slowly. I would be disappointed if you felt any other way, Miss James. Elara, she corrected him. Elara, he repeated. The name sounded different in his voice. Solid, respected. I had no intention of keeping you. My offer of sanctuary was genuine and without condition. However, he paused, picking up a tablet from the counter. I also had a business proposition for you. He turned the tablet toward her. On the screen was a series of stunningly rendered architectural drawings. They were her drawings. Specifically, they were from her thesis, the Sustainable Urban Residential Project, the one that had won the Allister Prize. This, he said, tapping the screen, is brilliant. The use of reclaimed materials, the modular design for community spaces, the integration of green roofs for urban farming. It is not just aesthetically pleasing, it is economically and socially visionary. It is a solution. She stared at the images of her own work, feeling that same disorienting mix of pride and vulnerability. It was a student project, she said dismissively, a reflex born of years of having her work belittled. It was a blueprint, he corrected, and I want to build it. He swiped the screen and a new image appeared, an aerial photograph of a large, derelict waterfront property in a neglected part of the city. My foundation acquired this land parcel 2 years ago. We have been looking for the right project, the right vision. This is it. He looked at her, his dark eyes intense. I am not offering you a job, Elara. I am offering you a company. I will provide the capital, the land, and the full resources of my organization. You will be the CEO and chief architect of a new development firm. You will have full creative control. Your only mandate will be to build this, and then to build whatever you want to build next. Your compensation will be a majority stake in the new company. Elara felt the air leave her lungs. It was an offer so audacious, so far beyond the realm of anything she had ever dared to imagine that she could not process it. It was not a rescue. It was an anointing. He was not giving her a shield. He was handing her a sword, a kingdom, and a map. Why? She asked again, the word feeling even smaller and more inadequate than it had last night. I told you, he said, his voice patient. I do not like to see brilliant work squandered, and from a purely business perspective, I believe your vision will be incredibly profitable, both financially and for the community. He paused. Also, my grandmother reviewed your thesis this morning. She thinks you are a genius and has already started a list of potential community garden vegetables. She would like to know if you have a preference for kale or Swiss chard. The absurdity of it, the sheer, wonderful absurdity, broke through her shock. A smile, a real one, spread across her face, reaching her eyes. Swiss chard, she said without thinking. It's more resilient in variable climates. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. A wise choice. My grandmother will be pleased. She is already annoyed. She gets that from you. They stood there for a moment, the unlikeliest of partners, brought together by a splash of wine and a decade of unacknowledged brilliance. He had not saved her. He had merely opened a door she had forgotten was even there. He had seen the queen on the chessboard who had been convinced she was a pawn. I accept, she said, her voice clear and strong. And in that moment, the recalibration was complete. She was no longer a survivor. She was a founder. Meanwhile, in a much less serene part of the city, Julian Croft woke up on the couch of a friend he barely liked. His head throbbed with a hangover that was less chemical and more existential. His memory of the previous night was a series of humiliating snapshots: the stain on Alara's dress, the unnerving stillness of the Korean man, the quiet, final words, "You're fired." He stumbled to the bathroom and stared at his reflection. He looked pathetic. He felt pathetic. But beneath the fear and the humiliation, a familiar, ugly feeling was beginning to stir. Righteous indignation. He had been wronged. Alara, his charity case, his project, had betrayed him. She had colluded with this foreigner to steal his company, his legacy. He had not updated the file. In his mind, Alara was still the quiet, timid girl who needed him. This display of defiance was a temporary insanity, a tantrum. Give her 3 days, he muttered to his reflection, splashing water on his face. 3 days without her keycard, without my credit card. She'll be begging to come back. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate, and he was about to make a series of fatal decisions based on that faulty data. His first call was to his lawyer, a slick, overpriced man who specialized in aggressive litigation. "I want to sue her," Julian snarled into the phone. "For breach of contract, for emotional distress. And this guy, this Kwan, I want to sue him for tortious interference." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Julian," the lawyer said, his voice suddenly very tired, "Jinwoo Kwan is not a man you sue. He is a man who sues continents and wins." "I don't care. She has an obligation," Julian shouted. The call did not go well. His second call was to the family trust. A polite, automated voice informed him his access privileges had been suspended. Panic, cold and sharp, began to cut through his anger. He drove to the office, the headquarters of Croft Development, the building with his name on it. His keycard did not work. The security guard, a man who had greeted him by name for 5 years, looked at him with a mixture of pity and fear and refused to let him in. Julian's world was shrinking, the walls closing in with terrifying speed. And it was all her fault. Alara. It had to be her. She had orchestrated this. The thought was absurd, but it was the only one his shattered ego could cling to. She had played the long game, the quiet, mousy little snake. His desperation escalated. He hired a private investigator, a seedy man who promised results. The PI's report was a single devastating page. Alara James was not staying at a hotel. She was residing at the Apex in the private penthouse of Jinwoo Kwan. She had been seen in meetings with the entire executive board of the Kwan Investment Group. A new corporate entity, Ethel Design and Development, had been registered, with Alara James listed as president and CEO. It was not a temporary tantrum. It was a coup. Julian's mind, unable to process the reality of his own obsolescence, snapped. He became obsessed. He started parking across the street from the Apex, watching the building for hours. He saw her once, getting into a sleek black car with Jinwoo. She was wearing a beautifully cut pantsuit, her hair styled differently. She was laughing. The sight of her laughing, of her thriving in his absence, was like a physical blow. He decided he needed to confront her. He needed to make her see the mistake she was making. He needed to reassert the old reality. His final, fatal miscalculation came in the form of an engraved invitation he found in his forwarded mail. The annual Foundation Gala for Urban Renewal. He was technically still on the host committee. It was his last remaining shred of status. The gala was being held at the newly opened Museum of Contemporary Design. He couldn't know that the museum was Jinwoo's pet project, and that the architect of the new, celebrated wing was none other than Alara herself, though her involvement was still a closely guarded secret, to be announced at the gala. Julian put on his best suit, the one that now felt too loose on his frame. He drank 2 glasses of scotch for courage and headed to the gala. He was not going as a guest. He was going as a ghost, haunting the edges of a life that was no longer his, determined to drag someone back into the darkness with him. He was a man walking into a trap he didn't even know had been set, a trap built not of malice, but of the simple, inexorable consequences of his own actions. The Museum of Contemporary Design was a masterpiece of light and air. It was a building that breathed. Alara walked through the main hall, a quiet, deep satisfaction settling in her bones. This was hers, not in the sense of ownership, but in the truer, deeper sense of creation. Every line, every angle, every fall of light on the polished concrete floors was a thought she had wrestled with, a problem she had solved. For the past 3 months, she had worked with an intensity she hadn't known she possessed. She had a team, a budget that seemed limitless, and in Jin Woo, a partner who was ruthlessly protective of her creative vision. He did not interfere. He did not suggest. He simply removed obstacles. A zoning issue that should have taken months was resolved in a day. A shipment of rare Italian marble stuck in customs appeared at the worksite overnight. He wielded his immense power not as a weapon, but as a finely tuned instrument, creating a perfect, silent space for her to work. Their relationship had settled into a rhythm of quiet companionship. They shared meals, not every day, but often. He would appear in her studio late at night, not with questions or demands, but with a tray of tea and small, perfect rice cakes from a shop his grandmother favored. He would sit in a chair in the corner and read reports on his tablet while she sketched, the only sounds the scratch of her pencil on paper and the soft tap of his finger on the screen. It was the most profound form of intimacy she had ever known, the shared peace of two focused, competent people coexisting in a single space. It was a partnership based on recognition and safety, not on passion, but it was growing into something deeper, something warmer. Tonight was the culmination. The gala was to celebrate the museum's opening, and Jinwoo had insisted she be his guest. She wore a dress of her own design, a column of midnight blue silk that was architecturally precise, its clean lines mirroring the building around her. She was not hiding tonight. She was not an accessory. She was the secret waiting to be revealed. She saw him across the hall talking to the mayor. He was in a dark blue suit, almost black, that made him look like a figure carved from shadow and moonlight. He caught her eye and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, of shared purpose. She felt a warmth spread through her chest. And then she saw Julian. He was standing near the entrance, looking haggard and out of place. His suit was rumpled, his face was flushed, and his eyes had a wild, desperate sheen. He was scanning the crowd, his gaze landing on her with a jolt of toxic recognition. He started moving toward her, shouldering his way through the elegant crowd with a brute force that was jarring in this graceful space. A flicker of the old fear, cold and sharp, went through her. But it was only a flicker. It was an echo, a muscle memory of a life she no longer lived. She did not run. She did not look away. She simply stood her ground, her back straight, and waited for him. "Ilara," he hissed as he reached her, grabbing her arm. The same grip, the same desperate need for ownership. But this time, it felt different. It felt weak, pathetic. "Let go of my arm, Julian," she said, her voice calm and clear. It carried no fear, only a faint, weary disappointment. "You have to come back," he pleaded, his voice a ragged whisper. "This is insane. This isn't you. He's brainwashed you. You belong with me, with your family." "You are not my family, Julian," she said, pulling her arm free with a strength that surprised him. "You were my jailer, and my term is over." "You owe me," he snarled, his voice rising, drawing the attention of those nearby. "Everything you have because of my father, because of me. I gave you a home. I gave you a life. You gave me a cage," she corrected him softly, "and you used my work to decorate it." His face contorted in a mask of rage. He was losing control, his desperation making him reckless. "You ungrateful bitch. After everything I did for you, you run off with the first rich man who looks at you. You think he cares about you? He's just like all the others. He's using you." The scene was turning ugly. People were staring, whispering. Julian was playing his last desperate card, public humiliation. He thought he could shame her back into submission. He had not updated the file. "He seems warm." The voice, low and placid, came from directly behind Julian. He spun around to see Jin Woo standing there, his hands in his pockets, an expression of mild curiosity on his face. He looked at Julian as a biologist might look at an interesting, if predictable, specimen. "You!" Julian spat, pointing a trembling finger. "This is your fault. You stole her. You stole my company." "I did not steal her," Jinwoo said, his gaze flicking to Alara for a fraction of a second, a silent question. She gave a tiny shake of her head. She would handle this. "She is not a possession to be stolen. And as for your company," he continued, his voice dropping slightly, "I simply paid the price it was worth. It was, I must admit, a bargain." He took a step forward, invading Julian's space with that same suffocating calm. "You believe you are a victim, Mr. Croft, but you are merely a consequence, a result of your own choices. You exploited a brilliant mind for a decade. You took credit for work you could not comprehend. You built a life on a foundation of lies and theft. A structure like that is bound to collapse. I simply gave it a small push." "I'll ruin you," Julian threatened, the words sounding hollow even to himself. "I'll tell everyone what you did." Jinwoo almost smiled. "Please, do. But before you do, perhaps you should understand the full scope of the situation." He took out his phone, a sleek black device. He tapped the screen a few times. "As of 90 minutes ago, the final paperwork was filed. The holding company that owned your father's assets, the one you leveraged so recklessly, has been dissolved. Its assets have been absorbed by the KIG Foundation for Urban Renewal." He gestured vaguely at the room around them. "This foundation, the one you are currently trespassing in." He continued, his voice a relentless, quiet litany of destruction. "The trust that paid for your apartment, your car, your lifestyle. It no longer exists. Your bank accounts have been frozen pending a forensic audit to investigate suspected embezzlement of Croft Development funds. There is a warrant for your arrest. The officers are waiting discreetly by the front entrance. They agreed to give you the dignity of finishing your drink." He glanced at the half-empty glass of scotch in Julian's hand. "I would advise you to finish it." Julian's face had gone completely white. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. The bravado, the anger, the performance, it all evaporated, leaving behind a raw, primal terror. He looked from Jinwoo's impassive face to Alara's calm one. He was looking at the architects of his ruin, and he finally understood. He had not been fighting a man. He had been fighting a partnership of equals. He dropped to his knees. The sound of his bones hitting the polished floor echoed in the sudden, vast silence of the hall. He didn't beg. He didn't sob. He just knelt there, a broken man in a ruined suit, the last vestiges of his world crumbling around him. The two police officers, dressed in formal wear, moved through the crowd and gently, professionally, helped him to his feet and led him away. He did not resist. The crowd remained silent, watching the man in the dark blue suit. Jinwoo ignored them. He turned to Alara, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" he asked, the same question as that first night, but the context was entirely different. Then he had been a rescuer. Now he was her partner. "I'm fine," she said, and she was. The catharsis was not loud or explosive. It was a quiet, deep settling, a final closing of a chapter. Jinwoo took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. He led her to the low stage at the front of the hall. He picked up a microphone. "Good evening," he said, his calm voice carrying through the silent room. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate the opening of this magnificent new wing." He paused, his eyes scanning the faces of the city's most powerful people. For months, there has been speculation about the architect behind this project. I have been given credit in the press, but that credit is misplaced. I am merely a financier. The vision, the brilliance, the soul of this building belongs to one person. He turned and looked at Alara, a universe of respect and admiration in his eyes. He held his hand out to her. On the massive screen behind them, a picture appeared. Alara, in a hard hat, laughing on the construction site, a blueprint clutched in her hand. Then another. A time lapse of the building rising from the ground, a testament to her vision. Ladies and gentlemen, Jin Woo said, his voice resonating with pride. I would like to introduce you to the most capable person in every room she enters, the CEO of Ethel Development and the architect of the future of this city. I would like to introduce you to Alara James. He stepped back, leaving her in the spotlight. A wave of applause, tentative at first, then thunderous, washed over her. She looked out at the sea of faces, the people who had once seen her as nothing more than Julian Croft's quiet stepsister. Now they saw her. They truly saw her. She did not cry. Her eyes were clear and bright. She stepped up to the microphone, the architect in her cathedral, and began to speak. Later, much later, they stood on the private terrace of the penthouse, the city lights a familiar comfort. The gala was over. The reporters had been handled. The congratulations had been accepted. Now, there was only the quiet. It was a different kind of silence than the one she had known before. It wasn't the silence of endurance or the silence of fear. It was the silence of peace, the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. Alara leaned against the railing, breathing in the cool night air. She had taken off her shoes, and the cold stone was pleasant against her bare feet. Jinwoo stood beside her, not touching, but his presence was a solid, reassuring warmth in the darkness. Ethel, he said, breaking the silence. I never asked you what it means. It's an old word, she explained, her voice soft. It means noble or of the land. It's about building things that are worthy of the place they inhabit, things that belong. A fitting name, he murmured. He looked at her, his expression serious. What you did tonight, facing him, speaking to the crowd, that was not easy. No, she agreed. It wasn't. But it was necessary. She turned to face him. For 10 years, I let him define me by my silence. I let him take my voice. Tonight, I took it back. He nodded, understanding completely. There was no pity in his eyes, only a deep, abiding respect. Your stepsister, the one who made that cruel remark. Did you know she called my office this morning? Alara's brow furrowed. She had almost forgotten about Julian's sister Candace, a woman who shared his casual cruelty. What did she want? A job, Jinwoo said, a hint of dry amusement in his tone. She heard KIG had acquired her family's assets and she wanted to ensure her position was secure. She suggested she could be a brand ambassador. What did you do? My assistant Ms. Choi informed her that we have certain standards for our brand ambassadors, he said, and that she did not meet them. Ms. Choi can be very direct. He paused. The CEO has certain standards. She removed them. Mostly. Alara laughed, a full, genuine laugh that echoed in the quiet night. The image of the perpetually flustered Candace being verbally dismantled by the terrifyingly efficient Ms. Choi was a small, perfect piece of karmic justice. The laughter faded into a comfortable quiet. Alara looked up at Jinwoo, at this man who had so irrevocably changed her life. He had given her a company, a platform, a future, but the greatest gift he had given her was the simple, profound act of seeing her correctly. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite name. It was more than gratitude. It was a sense of rightness, of finally being in the correct place in the universe. For what? He asked. For the push, she said. He reached out and took her hand. His fingers were warm and strong around hers. You were already in motion, Alara. I just cleared the path. They stood there for a long time, hand in hand, watching the city breathe below them. It was not a dramatic, cinematic kiss that sealed their new beginning. It was something quieter, deeper. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle, respectful kiss to her knuckles. It was a promise, a vow of partnership. "My grandmother wants to have dinner," he said, his voice a low murmur. "She has questions about crop rotation on the green roofs." Ilara smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached her eyes and made them shine. "Of course she does," she said. "Tell her I'll bring the schematics." As they turned to go back inside, into the warmth and light of the home they were beginning to build together, she felt a slow, deep exhale she had been holding for a decade. The weight was gone. The future was not a happily ever after. It was something far better. It was a blueprint waiting for her to build it. It was what comes next.